In 480 BC, King Leonidas and just 300 elite Spartans, alongside a few thousand Greek allies, stood at the narrow pass of Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, facing the immense Persian invasion force led by King Xerxes, an army said to number over 1 million, though modern estimates suggest hundreds of thousands, stretching across the horizon like an endless sea of soldiers, archers, and immortals. For 3 grueling days, these heavily armored Spartans, trained from childhood for war and wielding long spears, bronze shields, and unbreakable discipline, held the choke point where the mountains met the sea, forcing the Persians to attack in waves through a bottleneck no wider than a cart path, turning their numerical advantage into a fatal disadvantage as the Greeks' phalanx formation repelled charge after charge, slaughtering thousands upon thousands of Persian troops. Historical accounts claim over 10,000 elite fighters fell, including many of Xerxes' prized Immortals, while the defenders suffered minimal losses in the initial clashes. The stakes could not have been higher. If the Persians broke through, they would sweep south to sack Athens and crush the birthplace of democracy, potentially extinguishing the fragile flame of Greek freedom and altering the course of Western civilization forever, as Xerxes sought revenge for his father's defeat at Marathon and aimed to conquer all of Greece under his empire's yoke. But as the battle unfolded, unexpected challenges arose. A local trader named Ephialtes revealed a hidden mountain path to the Persians, allowing them to outflank the Greeks from behind, forcing Leonidas to dismiss most of his allies, while he and his 300 Spartans, along with 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans who chose to stay, formed a final desperate line to buy time for the rest of Greece to rally. In a remarkable and defiant climax, the surrounded Spartans fought to the last man in a whirlwind of spears and swords, Leonidas himself falling in the melee, yet inspiring his warriors to inflict even more devastating losses on the encircling enemy, their bodies piled high as they refused to surrender, embodying the Spartan creed of victory or death. In the end, though the pass fell and the 300 perished, their heroic stand inflicted catastrophic casualties on the Persians, shattered the myth of Xerxes' invincibility, delayed the invasion long enough for the Greeks to evacuate Athens and prepare their navy, and ignited a fire of resistance that led to decisive victories at Salamis and Plataea, ultimately repelling the Persians and preserving Greek independence. Consider how Leonidas and his 300 not only saved their homeland in that moment, but forged an eternal legend of courage against overwhelming tyranny, a story that has inspired generations, from ancient historians like Herodotus to modern films, and reminds us that true strength lies not in numbers, but in unbreakable will and sacrifice for freedom.
And individual freedom that would one day shape the world, while the victory of tiny Sparta and its allies could inspire the rest of Greece to unite against the Persian juggernaut, proving that free men fighting for their homeland could defy even the most powerful empire on earth. As the first day dawned, the Persians launched wave after wave of attacks, their Medes and Scythians hurling themselves against the impenetrable Greek phalanx, only to be cut down in droves by the overlapping shields and thrusting spears of the Spartans, whose disciplined formation turned the narrow pass into a killing ground where Persian numbers meant nothing and their arrows fell harmlessly against bronze armor. Yet as exhaustion set in and the Persians grew frustrated, Xerxes threw his elite Immortals into the fray, expecting them to break the Greek line, but even these hand-picked warriors were repulsed with heavy losses, their bodies piling up before the Spartan wall as Leonidas rotated his men to keep them fresh and their morale sky-high, taunting the enemy and refusing to yield a single inch. Then, on the second day, as hope flickered among the Greeks that they could hold indefinitely, a Greek trader named Ephialtes approached Xerxes and revealed an ancient mountain path that could outflank the pass, a devastating betrayal that turned the tide overnight and forced Leonidas into an impossible choice when scouts reported Persian forces descending behind them. Knowing the position was lost, Leonidas dismissed most of the allied contingents to preserve the Greek army for future battles, yet he and his 300 Spartans chose to stay, joined voluntarily by 700 brave Thespians and 400 Thebans, forming a final ring on a small hill to fight to the death and delay the Persians as long as possible, buying precious days for the Greek fleet and cities to prepare. In the ferocious climax, surrounded on all sides and running low on spears, the remaining Greeks fought with swords, hands, and teeth, Leonidas himself falling early, yet his men raging on in a storm of blood and bronze, inflicting thousands more casualties as arrows darkened the sky, and the Persians finally overwhelmed them through sheer weight of numbers, but at a cost so staggering that Xerxes' invasion was crippled in both manpower and morale. Though the 300 and their comrades perished to the last man, their sacrifice was not in vain. The delay allowed the Greeks to evacuate Athens, win the naval battle at Salamis months later, and ultimately drive the Persians from Greece at Plataea, ensuring the survival of Greek culture and the ideas that would foundation Western civilization. Consider how Leonidas and his 300 not only held the line against impossible odds, but created an undying legend of defiance, a story told by Herodotus, immortalized in art and film, and forever reminding the world that true courage is measured not by victory alone, but by the willingness to stand and fight for freedom when all seems lost.
As the sun rose on the third and final day, the remaining Greeks, now just Leonidas, his 300 Spartans, the loyal 700 Thespians who refused to leave, and the 400 Thebans who stayed out of duty, knew their time had come. Yet they formed up with the same iron discipline that had defined the previous days, marching out from their defensive wall to meet the encircling Persians head-on in open ground, abandoning the narrow pass to sell their lives as dearly as possible and maximize the delay for the retreating Greek forces. Xerxes, enraged by the humiliation of the past 2 days and the staggering losses his army had suffered, far beyond the 10,000 elite troops already fallen, ordered a relentless barrage of arrows followed by a massed assault from all sides, turning the sky black with projectiles that finally began to thin the Greek ranks. Yet even then, the Spartans fought with ferocious precision, using broken spears as javelins, drawing short swords to hack through Persian lines, and wrestling hand-to-hand when weapons failed, their crimson cloaks and lambda-shielded phalanx holding formation even as men dropped around them. Leonidas himself charged at the forefront, cutting down Persian officers and nobles in a bid to reach Xerxes' command position, his presence inspiring his warriors to superhuman feats of endurance until he was finally struck down by a hail of arrows and spears, his death only fueling the remaining Greeks into a berserk fury that saw them push back multiple Persian units and claim hundreds more lives in close-quarters slaughter. The Thespians, led by Demophilus, fought with equal valor beside the Spartans, refusing every offer of surrender and dying almost to a man in a final stand that history remembers as one of the noblest acts of voluntary sacrifice, while the Thebans eventually threw down their arms in exhaustion, though many had fought bravely until the end. When the battle finally ended and the dust settled, the hillside was carpeted with Persian dead. Ancient sources like Herodotus record that Xerxes ordered the bodies rearranged to hide the true scale of his losses, yet even conservative modern estimates confirm thousands upon thousands of casualties against the total annihilation of the Greek rearguard, proving that the 300 had indeed crushed a vastly superior force in terms of damage inflicted, breaking the momentum of the invasion and forcing Xerxes to reconsider the cost of conquest. The psychological blow was even greater. Persian soldiers who had believed their king divine now whispered of Greek daemons. Morale plummeted across the empire's ranks, and Xerxes himself grew paranoid and hasty, leading to his disastrous defeat at Salamis just weeks later, where the Greek navy, emboldened by the time bought at Thermopylae, destroyed the Persian fleet and cut off supply lines.
In the longer aftermath, the stand at the Hot Gates unified the fractious Greek city-states as nothing else could, sparking a national resistance that culminated in the liberation of Greece at Plataea the following year, and securing the survival of Athenian democracy, Spartan military tradition, and the philosophical revolution that would birth Western thought from Socrates to Aristotle. Consider how this single, defiant act by 300 men and their allies not only altered the trajectory of history by preserving the cradle of freedom against Eastern despotism, but became the ultimate archetype of heroic sacrifice, etched into marble inscriptions, retold by Herodotus as the defining tale of valor, celebrated in poetry and art across centuries, and still echoing today in every story of outnumbered defenders who refuse to yield, reminding us that courage, discipline, and the willingness to die for something greater than oneself can indeed crush empires and inspire the world for millennia to come.
The echoes of Thermopylae rippled far beyond the blood-soaked pass itself, for when news of the 300's final stand reached the Greek city-states, it transformed fear into fury and hesitation into resolve, galvanizing even bitter rivals like Athens and Sparta to set aside old grudges and commit fully to the war effort. While the sight of Xerxes' once invincible host limping southward, depleted, demoralized, and haunted by the memory of bronze-clad warriors who fought like gods, gave the Greeks the confidence they desperately needed to gamble everything on their navy at the narrow straits of Salamis, where Themistocles lured the massive Persian fleet into confined waters and annihilated it in a single day, stranding Xerxes' land army without supplies and forcing the great king himself to flee back to Asia in disgrace, leaving his general Mardonius to face the united Greek army the following year at Plataea. There, on an open plain in Boeotia, the Spartans, under Pausanias, fighting with the same phalanx discipline honed at the Hot Gates, led a devastating charge that shattered the Persian center, killed Mardonius, and routed the remnants of the invasion force in what became the decisive land battle of the Greco-Persian Wars, ensuring that the Persian Empire would never again threaten the Greek mainland and allowing the classical Greek world to flourish undisturbed for generations. The victory preserved not only political independence, but the cultural and intellectual explosion that followed. Athens rebuilt its Acropolis into the gleaming symbol we know today. Pericles launched the Golden Age. Playwrights like Sophocles and Aeschylus, himself a veteran of Marathon, dramatized the wars on stage. Philosophers like Socrates and Plato laid the foundations of Western thought, and historians like Herodotus immortalized the events in writing, all made possible because 300 Spartans and their allies chose to stand and die in a narrow pass rather than retreat. Centuries later, the story continued to inspire. When Alexander the Great marched east to conquer the Persian Empire that had once threatened Greece, he carried the memory of Thermopylae as both motivation and warning, visiting the battlefield to honor Leonidas before crossing into Asia. Roman generals studied the tactics of disciplined heavy infantry holding a choke point. Medieval knights adopted Spartan imagery in their heraldry, and in modern times, the stand has been invoked by soldiers facing overwhelming odds from the Alamo to World War II trenches, while artists, poets, and filmmakers, from the 1962 epic 300 Spartans to Frank Miller's graphic novel and its adaptations, have kept the legend alive in popular culture. Consider how a single act of defiance by a tiny force, outnumbered hundreds to one, yet refusing to yield, did not merely delay an invasion, but fundamentally shaped the trajectory of human history, safeguarding the fragile seeds of democracy, individual liberty, and rational inquiry that grew into the bedrock of Western civilization, proving once and for all that the true power of free men fighting for their homeland can crush even the mightiest empires and leave a legacy that burns brighter with every passing millennium.
Yet the true measure of Thermopylae's triumph lies not in the immediate victories at Salamis and Plataea alone, but in the profound and enduring ways it reshaped human history across continents and centuries. For by halting Xerxes' advance, even briefly, the Greeks gained the breathing room to develop their unique civilization unchecked. Athens rose as a maritime superpower, funding the construction of the Parthenon and sponsoring the dramatic festivals where Euripides, Aristophanes, and Sophocles explored themes of freedom, fate, and heroism drawn directly from the Persian Wars. Sparta maintained its austere warrior society that influenced later military thinkers from Rome to Prussia. And the collective Greek experience of repelling Eastern despotism forged a fierce sense of identity rooted in liberty and self-governance that directly informed the Roman Republic's ideals, which in turn passed down through the Renaissance, Enlightenment, and modern democracies. Without that stand at the hot gates, the Persian model of absolute monarchy and centralized imperial rule might have smothered the experimental spirit of the Greek polis, stifling the birth of systematic philosophy. Herodotus himself, the father of history, wrote his inquiries partly to preserve the memory of these events and explain why East and West clashed. Thucydides drew lessons from the wars for his own Peloponnesian analysis, and the scientific method pioneered by thinkers like Anaxagoras and Democritus in a free Athens might never have taken root under Persian satraps who demanded conformity. The legends spread rapidly beyond Greece when Philip of Macedon and his son Alexander unified the Greek states decades later. They invoked Thermopylae as justification for their retaliatory campaign against Persia, with Alexander pausing at Troy to honor Achilles and later at the battlefield itself to pay respects to Leonidas before launching his conquests that Hellenized the known world, carrying Greek culture as far as India and ensuring that even in defeat, the Persian Empire absorbed the very ideas it once sought to crush. Roman emperors like Augustus and Trajan studied the battle for its lessons in discipline and terrain, incorporating phalanx-inspired formations into their legions. Byzantine chroniclers retold the story as a Christian precursor to their own defenses against later invaders. And during the Middle Ages, Crusader chroniclers compared their own outnumbered charges to the Spartan stand, while Renaissance artists like Michelangelo drew inspiration from classical heroism when sculpting figures of defiant strength. In the modern era, the narrative has proven equally potent. Lord Byron romanticized the battle in his poetry, invoking Leonidas when fighting for Greek independence from the Ottomans in the 1820s. Confederate generals at Gettysburg referenced the Spartan band in dispatches. Allied soldiers in World War I and II carried pocket editions of Herodotus or quoted Molon Labe, "Come and take them," when facing encirclement, and countless military academies from West Point to Sandhurst teach Thermopylae as the ultimate case study in defensive warfare, morale, and sacrificial delay. Even in popular culture, the story refuses to fade, from the stirring 1962 film The 300 Spartans that influenced a young Frank Miller to create his graphic novel 300, which in turn spawned Zack Snyder's visually explosive adaptations that introduced the battle to entirely new generations. The imagery of red-cloaked warriors standing shield to shield against endless hordes has become shorthand for any desperate but principled resistance against overwhelming power. Consider how those 3 days in a narrow pass, where just 300 Spartans and their steadfast allies chose death over submission, did not merely crush 10,000 of the enemy's finest and derail the greatest invasion of the ancient world, but ignited a chain reaction that preserved and propagated the values of freedom, courage, and rational inquiry across millennia, shaping law, art, science, government, and warfare in ways we still feel today, proving beyond doubt that the defiant spirit of a few determined men can indeed alter the destiny of civilizations and leave an indestructible legacy that continues to inspire every soul who refuses to bow before tyranny.
And perhaps most profoundly, the stand at Thermopylae became a timeless template for how a small, disciplined force can leverage terrain, training, and sheer will to neutralize overwhelming numerical superiority, a lesson absorbed by military minds across eras. Hannibal studied Greek defensive tactics before crossing the Alps. Julius Caesar explicitly referenced the phalanx and choke point defense when facing the Gauls. Napoleon annotated accounts of the Persian wars in his personal library. Clausewitz cited the psychological impact of such stands in his theories on morale as the decisive factor in war. And modern strategists, from Vietnam's General Giap holding Dien Bien Phu to Israeli commanders at the Valley of Tears in 1973, drew direct parallels to Leonidas's delay and bleed strategy, proving that the principles demonstrated in that narrow pass remain as relevant in asymmetric warfare today as they were 2.5 millennia ago. The archaeological evidence itself bears witness to the scale of the slaughter. Excavations at the site have uncovered Persian arrowheads by the thousands, layered in the soil like a grim carpet, while the ancient monument erected by the Greeks, an inscribed stone lion marking Leonidas's last position, and the famous epigram, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie," stood for centuries as a place of pilgrimage, later replaced by a modern memorial that still draws visitors who leave flowers and reflect on sacrifice. Even the names of the fallen were preserved. A stele discovered in Sparta lists all 300 by name, a rare honor that underscores how deeply the city-state revered their obedience to duty, while the Thespians, often overshadowed in popular retellings, received their own eternal recognition in Greek memory for choosing to stay when they could have left. In literature and philosophy, the battle became a touchstone for exploring the human condition. Plutarch devoted entire chapters to Leonidas's leadership. Rousseau contrasted Spartan virtue with Persian luxury in his political writings, and American founders like Thomas Jefferson and Adam Zahms referenced Thermopylae when debating the need for citizen soldiers ready to defend liberty against tyranny. The 20th and 21st centuries have only amplified its reach. During the Greek War of Independence, fighters chanted Spartan slogans. Winston Churchill alluded to the few holding the line in his speeches. And today, special forces units around the world, from the U.S. Army Rangers to Greek elite troops, adopt Molon Labe as a motto, while video games, novels, and documentaries continually reintroduce the story to younger audiences who discover in it the same thrill of defiance that gripped the ancient world. Consider how, in an age of drones and nuclear deterrence, the raw human drama of 300 men standing shield to shield against an empire still captivates us because it strips war to its essence, not technology or numbers, but the unbreakable spirit of those willing to pay the ultimate price for something greater than themselves, ensuring that Leonidas and his Spartans did not merely crush 10,000 Persians on a forgotten battlefield, but forged an immortal flame that continues to light the path of every generation facing darkness, reminding us all that true victory is measured not just in survival, but in the courage to stand when standing seems impossible, and that such courage can indeed reshape the world for thousands of years to come.
Thus, in every epoch where freedom has been threatened, the specter of those 300 red-cloaked warriors has risen like a beacon, summoning the defiant to hold the line regardless of cost. During the American Revolution, patriots at Bunker Hill and Valley Forge invoked Spartan endurance to steel themselves against British regulars. In the trenches of World War I, British officers read aloud from Herodotus to exhausted troops facing endless German assaults. At the Battle of Wisna in 1939, 720 Polish soldiers held off 40,000 Germans for 3 days and explicitly compared themselves to Leonidas. South Korean and UN forces at the Chosin Reservoir echoed the stand when surrounded by hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops in freezing hell. And even in contemporary conflicts, special operators tattoo Molon Labe on their arms and whisper the names of Leonidas and Dionysius, the Spartan famed for joking that Persian arrows would blot out the sun, allowing them to fight in the shade, before heading into missions where odds are long and retreat is not an option. The battle's tactical brilliance continues to be dissected in war colleges worldwide. How Leonidas chose the perfect terrain where only a handful could hold thousands. How he rotated frontline fighters to maintain freshness while the Persians had no such relief. How psychological warfare, Spartan laconic taunts and refusal to fear death demoralized an enemy accustomed to swift submission. And how the deliberate sacrifice of the rear guard maximized strategic impact by inflicting disproportionate casualties and buying irreplaceable time.
Scholars still debate the exact numbers. Herodotus's claim of 1.7 million Persians is almost certainly exaggerated for dramatic effect, with modern historians settling on 150,000 to 300,000 total invaders, of whom perhaps 20,000 perished across the campaign, including the heavy losses at Thermopylae itself. But the ratio remains staggering, and the core truth endures. A tiny, cohesive, superbly trained force leveraged every advantage of ground, preparation, and morale to bloody a vastly superior army so severely that the invasion's momentum fractured irreparably. Artifacts continue to emerge that keep the story immediate. Divers off Artemisium recovered bronze helmets and arrowheads from the simultaneous naval battle fought in coordination with Thermopylae. The Kolonaki Hill, where the final stand occurred, still bears scars of ancient combat, and every year on August 20, modern Spartans and history enthusiasts gather at the monument to reenact the battle, running the original paths and reading the epigrams aloud under the same relentless Greek sun. The story's power lies in its universality. It is not merely a Greek or Western tale, but a human one, resonating wherever people choose principle over survival, dignity over domination, and collective liberty over individual safety, which is why it has been translated into hundreds of languages, taught in schools from Tokyo to Texas, and adapted into every medium imaginable, always carrying the same electric charge that makes listeners lean forward and ask, "What would I have done?" Consider how, across 2.5 millennia, the defiant roar of 300 Spartans and their allies has never truly faded, but instead grown ever louder, echoing through every desperate defense of freedom, every refusal to kneel before superior force, every moment when ordinary men choose to become legends by standing together in the breach, proving with finality that courage concentrated in a narrow pass can indeed crush the ambitions of empires, preserve the light of civilization through its darkest hours, and forge a legacy so unbreakable that it continues to arm the hearts of the free with unbreakable resolve long after the last spear has turned to dust.
In this way, the Battle of Thermopylae transcends mere history to become a living archetype woven into the very fabric of human aspiration, a perpetual reminder that the most consequential victories are often won not on the fields of triumph, but in the moments of apparent defeat, where character is revealed and legacies are forged. For every time a lone voice speaks truth to power, every time a small nation resists a superpower, every time soldiers dig in against impossible odds, knowing reinforcements may never come, the spirit of Leonidas and his 300 walks among them, whispering that glory is not reserved for the many or the mighty, but for those who choose honor over life and principle over surrender. The ancient Spartans themselves would have scorned the modern world's obsession with survival at any cost, raised as they were in the agoge, where boys learned to endure pain, steal without detection, and face death without flinching, all to produce warriors who valued the survival of their city and its laws above their own existence. And it was precisely this cultural crucible that allowed 300 men to stand calmly under a storm of arrows while lesser armies would have broken and fled. Their final moments, as described by surviving Greek accounts and inferred from Persian silence on the details, must have been a scene of almost superhuman composure. Shields locked even as comrades fell, laconic jokes exchanged amid the carnage, and a collective refusal to give the enemy the satisfaction of panic or pleas, embodying the ethos that a Spartan's life belonged not to himself but to Sparta, and that dying well was the ultimate duty. Modern psychology recognizes this as the power of shared purpose and identity to elevate human performance beyond normal limits, the same phenomenon seen in elite units today who train to internalize a code where mission and brotherhood override self-preservation. And it explains why the Persians, drawn from dozens of conquered nations fighting for pay or under compulsion, could not match the cohesion and ferocity of free men defending their way of life. The aftermath saw Xerxes himself touring the battlefield in a rare display of unease, ordering Leonidas's body mutilated in frustration, an act that only underscored how deeply the stand had shaken him, before hastily pressing southward.
Yet the seeds of his downfall were already sown, for the delay and losses at Thermopylae forced him to leave behind substantial garrisons and weakened his logistical chain, contributing directly to the overextension that doomed the campaign. Generations of Greeks honored the site with annual rites and games, sending delegations to sacrifice at the monument long after Sparta's own power waned, while the story's migration into broader culture ensured its survival through the fall of Greece, the rise and fall of Rome, the long medieval night, and every subsequent age of turmoil and rebirth. Consider, then, how profoundly those 3 days in 480 BC continue to shape our world, not through the survival of Sparta itself, which eventually faded, nor through the literal preservation of every Greek institution, but through the undying idea that courage, discipline, and sacrifice in the face of tyranny can purchase a future for freedom that no amount of gold or numbers can conquer. An idea that has sustained countless defenders of liberty across the ages and will doubtless inspire many more as long as human beings value anything beyond mere existence, proving with timeless certainty that 300 determined Spartans truly did crush far more than 10,000 Persians on that fateful ground. They crushed the illusion that empires are invincible, and in doing so, they armed the human spirit with a weapon that no darkness has ever managed to extinguish.